For centuries, these stories have remained hidden in the pages of the Bible. Yet many people have never heard their names. Today, their forgotten stories are brought back to life. One wrong move, and the book of the law would be lost forever. A simple priest cleaning a forgotten temple discovered a hidden room. Inside was a scroll nobody knew still existed. He brought it to the king, but after reading it, the king tore his clothes in complete horror. But to understand what was in that book and how he found it, we must first go back to the beginning of Hilkiah's story. The temple in Jerusalem had stood for many, many years. Inside its walls were rooms that had not been opened in a long time. Dust covered the floors. For years, kings before this one had let the temple fall apart, piece by piece, year by year, until much of it looked like a building nobody cared about anymore. Hilkiah was the high priest. Every day he walked through the giant temple halls. He knew every stone. He knew where the doors were stuck and where the roof leaked. But even he did not know that somewhere inside those walls, something was waiting. Something had been lost for so long that nobody even knew it was gone. Then things started to change. One ordinary morning while Hilkiah was walking through the outer court, the heavy temple gate creaked open. He heard the stomp of boots. He turned around, and there were royal guards, their swords shining in the sun. Behind them walked the king of Judah. His name was Josiah. He was still quite young, but he had a face that looked very serious. His father had been a wicked king who loved idols and hated the laws of God. One night, soldiers turned against that king inside his own palace, and by morning, he was dead. The people gathered in the courtyard the next day and set a crown on the head of his son, a boy of only 8. The crown slipped sideways on his small head, standing alone in front of a crowd far older than he was. Josiah grew up watching his country fill up with fake gods and altars built on hilltops. He saw the temple falling down, and it made his heart ache. He did not want to be like his father. He wanted to do what was right. Josiah walked up to the high priest. He did not look at the broken walls like they were just a building. He looked at them like they were a mistake that needed to be fixed. He called his helper, a man named Shaphan. "Go to Hilkiah," the king said. "Tell him to take the money the people brought to the temple, use it to pay the builders, the carpenters, and the stone masons. Buy the best wood and the strongest stone. The house of the Lord must be made perfect again." Shaphan took the king's message and crossed the city to the temple gates. He found Hilkiah counting coins near the entrance and gave him every word exactly as the king had said it. Hilkiah called for the treasurers at once, and the silver that had sat untouched in storage chests for years was carried out and weighed into the hands of the builders waiting outside. The work began. It was loud and busy. Hammers banged against old, hard stone. Workers climbed onto the high roof, balancing on beams that creaked under their weight. They pushed open heavy doors that had been locked since before Josiah was born, the hinges screaming from years of rust. They swept out years of dirt and pulled out pieces of wood that were rotting away, carrying basket after basket of broken debris out through the gates and dumping it in growing piles outside the walls. Hilkiah walked behind them, watching everything. He stopped at one wall, where new stone had just been set beside the old, pressing his hand against it to test if the mortar had dried. He moved on to a stack of fresh timber and counted the beams against what was written in his ledger. He was busy, but he was also calm. He just thought he was helping to fix a building. He had no idea he was actually walking toward the most important discovery in the history of his people. Day after day, the workers cleared out more rooms. They pulled down old shelving thick with cobwebs. They scraped years of grime off the floors with iron tools. the scraping sound echoing through the halls. They were deep inside the temple now, in a part of the building where no light ever reached. Rooms that had not seen a lamp in generations. The air was so dusty it made them cough, and more than once a worker had to step back out into the courtyard just to breathe clean air before returning to the task. One afternoon, a worker moved a heavy, broken beam out of the way, grunting with the effort, dragging it across the floor with a long, scraping sound. Behind it was a small, hidden storage room. It was dark and felt very lonely, the kind of room a person could walk past 100 times and never once notice the door. Hilkiah walked inside to check the progress. He held his lamp out in front of him, the small flame barely pushing back the darkness. He moved past broken jars stacked against the wall, careful not to knock them over. He moved his lamp lower, and the light hit something lying on the floor.
Before we continue, these videos takes many hours. If you could please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
It was not a stone or a piece of wood. It was a scroll made of old, dry parchment. It was tied with a string that looked like it would turn to dust if he breathed on it too hard. He reached out and picked it up. His hands shook. He had never seen a scroll this old. He carefully untied the string and unrolled it just enough to see the first lines. His eyes went wide. He gasped so loud the workers stopped their hammering and looked toward the doorway. It was the Book of the Law, the very words that God had given to Moses on the mountain. It had been sitting there in the dark, buried under years of dirt, forgotten by everyone. Hilkiah tucked the scroll under his arm and ran. He did not walk. He ran straight through the temple halls, past startled workers, out through the courtyard, until he found Shaphan near the gate. "I have found the Book of the Law!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Shaphan took the scroll carefully in both hands. He sat down right there and read through it himself first, his lips moving silently over the words. He knew he had to tell the king. He rolled the scroll closed, tucked it against his chest, and walked quickly to the palace. He went to the palace and bowed before Josiah. He gave his report first. The silver delivered, the workers paid, the wood and stone already being put to use. Only then did he mention the scroll. "The high priest gave me a book," he said. And then he stood up and began to read it out loud. The king listened as the words filled the room. Josiah's face went white. He heard how the people had promised to love God and how they had broken every single promise. He realized that for his whole life, his people had been walking in the dark, doing things that made God very sad. Josiah grabbed his royal robe. With a loud, sharp sound, he tore the fabric in two. "Go," Josiah whispered to his men. "Go and ask the Lord what we should do. Ask him for mercy. I am afraid that the anger of the Lord is burning against us, because we have not followed what is written in this book." Hilkiah and the other men left the temple and went through the winding, busy streets to find Huldah the prophetess. Merchants called out from their stalls as the group passed. Children ran between their legs, chasing each other through the crowd. None of them knew what the 5 men carried with them, or why their faces looked so grim. She lived in the second part of the city. When they told her about the book and showed her the king's torn robe, she did not look surprised. She sat across from them and listened to every word without interrupting, her hands folded calmly in her lap, even as the men in front of her grew more uneasy. She looked at them with eyes that seemed to see right through the walls. "Tell the king," she said, her voice deep and firm, "that the Lord is going to bring trouble on this land. The people have turned away from me and worshipped idols, and I'm angry. The fire of my judgment is coming." The men stood still, terrified. But then Huldah looked at them again. "But tell the king this, because your heart was soft, and because you humbled yourself and cried when you heard my words, I have heard you. You will die in peace. You will not have to see the disaster I am bringing on this place." Hilkiah and his friends walked back through the same streets, past the same merchants and the same children. They reached the palace and told the king every word, exactly as Huldah had said it. Josiah did not hide the news. He called all the people of Jerusalem together, the old, the young, the priests, and the common people. Word spread through every street and every household, and by the time the sun was high, a massive crowd had gathered, stretching as far as the eye could see, filling every corner of the temple court. Josiah stood by the pillar, opened the scroll, and read the entire book of God to the people, his voice carrying across the silent crowd from the first word to the last. Then the king made a promise. He stood before everyone and swore that he would follow the Lord with all his heart and all his soul, and that he would keep the laws written in the scroll. The people raised their voices together and shouted that they would do the same, the sound rolling out across the courtyard like thunder. Old men who remembered nothing like this happening in their lifetimes wept where they stood. Mothers pulled their children close and pointed toward the king, telling them to remember this day. The work started the next morning. Josiah did not just fix the temple. He started a war against the idols. He ordered his men to smash every statue of the false gods, dragging them out of the temple by the armful, the broken pieces piling up in the courtyard until carts had to be brought in to haul them away. He pulled down the altars on the hilltops, sending workers out with hammers and iron bars to break apart stones that had stood for generations. The sound of stone cracking apart echoing across the valleys. He took the things people had worshipped for years and burned them until they were nothing but black piles of ash. He went into every town, clearing out the bad, until there was nothing left to distract the people from the true God. He sent men north into territory that had once belonged to Israel, into towns far from Jerusalem, tearing down altars that had stood since long before his own grandfather had been born. Soldiers marched from village to village with carts of tools, knocking down shrines that village elders had tended their whole lives, scattering the broken stones into ravines so no one could ever rebuild them. At a place called Bethel, where a golden calf had been worshipped for centuries, his men tore the altar apart, stone by stone, and set fire to the wreckage until nothing remained. He even brought back the Passover. Priests stood in the temple courts and called out instructions to the crowds gathering around them, reading aloud from the very scroll Hilkiah had found, since most families had never once celebrated it and did not know where to begin. Fathers carried lambs through the streets toward the temple. Mothers prepared bread without yeast, exactly as the scroll described, calling their children inside to help. By evening, fires burned in courtyards across the city, the smell of roasting meat drifting between the houses. The whole land celebrated, singing songs to the Lord, just like in the days of old, the sound of celebration reaching every corner of Jerusalem. Hilkiah stood by the king's side through all of it. He watched the temple he had once seen in ruins become a place of joy. He walked the same halls every day, past the same storage room where he had once knelt in the dark, past the same gate where he had once turned to find his king standing there for the first time. The scroll was no longer a piece of dusty trash in a dark corner. It was the light of the whole nation. The king had changed, the people had changed, and the land was clean. One wrong move, and she would die. A foreign princess became queen of Israel. She brought her gods, spread the worship of Baal, and hunted the prophets of the Lord. For decades, no one could stop her, until one day, a man had enough. In the land of Phoenicia, in the city of Sidon, there lived a princess named Jezebel. From the time she was a small girl, she had watched the priests of Baal climb the temple steps at dawn, and she grew up believing that Baal controlled the rain and the harvest, and that no god in any land could rival him. She had never bowed to the God of Israel.
I will not bow.
And she never intended to. In the kingdom of Israel, a king named Ahab sat on the throne. He wanted an alliance with Phoenicia, and so he asked for Jezebel's hand in marriage. The marriage was arranged, and word came to Sidon that the princess would be sent north to become queen of a land she had never seen. She left the city at the head of a long procession, chariots and servants and chests filled with gold and silver. Behind her, carried carefully on wrapped litters, came the carved images of Baal and Asherah, wrapped in cloth, so the journey would not chip them. Her father had told her, before she left, that she was not just a bride being sent away, but a princess carrying her gods into a kingdom. She did not look back as the city disappeared behind her. She had already decided that wherever she was going, her gods were going with her. The journey took many days. At night, when the procession stopped, Jezebel could hear her attendants whispering about the country they were entering, a kingdom that worshipped a god they could not see, with no statue and no image. Some of them were afraid and said so quietly among themselves, wondering what kind of people lived without a god they could touch. She listened to them and said nothing, but she had already made up her mind that this god, whoever he was, would learn to share his land. When the gates of Samaria finally came into view, Jezebel did not see a foreign city waiting to be endured. She saw a kingdom waiting to be remade. She brought her gods with her. In Samaria, Jezebel built a temple to Baal and raised an altar inside it. She brought hundreds of priests of Baal into the palace, and she fed them at the king's table, watching them eat in the very halls where, generations before, kings of Israel had once been told there was no God beside the Lord. But what the people of Israel did not know was that this was no accident. No foreign wife simply keeping her childhood customs in a strange land. Jezebel intended to tear the worship of the Lord out of Israel completely, and she would not stop until every prophet who stood against her was dead. She sent soldiers to hunt down the prophets of the Lord. They went from village to village, dragging men from their homes before dawn, while their families watched and could do nothing. Many were killed where they stood. Others ran before the soldiers arrived, hiding among the rocks with no food and no fire, listening for footsteps above them and praying the footsteps would pass. A prophet of the Lord heard what happened. He walked into the king's court and stood before the throne, and the guards who might have stopped him simply stepped aside, as if something in his face told them not to.
As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word,
he said. The rain stopped, the crops withered, and the people of Israel grew thin with hunger. Mothers had nothing to feed their children and gave their own share away until they had nothing left for themselves.
No, I'm not hungry.
Men who once worked the fields now sat outside their empty storehouses with nothing to do but wait, too proud to beg and too hungry not to. Children who once played in the streets now sat quietly beside their mothers, too weak to run. For 3 years, no rain fell, and the hunger only grew worse. In the 3rd year, the prophet returned to the king. "Gather all of Israel to Mount Carmel," he said, "and bring the prophets of Baal with you." The people gathered at the mountain, climbing the slopes from every direction. Mothers carrying children too weak to walk on their own. Old men leaning on sticks. all of them drawn by the same hunger and the same unspoken hope that something was finally about to change. The prophets of Baal came down from Samaria, 450 of them, certain of what their God would do. The prophet of the Lord stood before the crowd. "How long will you waver between two gods?" He said, "If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him." The people said nothing. No one moved. He told them to bring the 2 bulls and lay them on 2 altars, but light no fire under either one. Whichever God answered with fire from heaven, that God was the true God. The prophets of Baal went first. They circled their altar from sunrise, calling out, cutting their own arms with knives. They screamed for hours. Nothing answered. Then the prophet of the Lord stepped forward. He laid his bull on the wood and dug a trench around the altar. And he had the people pour water over the offering again and again, soaking it through, filling the trench around the stones. He prayed, quietly enough that the crowd had to lean in to hear him. "Lord, answer me, so this people will know that you are God." Fire fell from the sky. It came down so fast that the crowd staggered back. It consumed the bull, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench, until there was nothing left but blackened ground. The people fell on their faces and cried out, "The Lord, He is God." The prophets of Baal were seized where they stood and led down into the valley. And there they were put to death, all 450 of them. A messenger ran from the mountain to bring the news to Jezebel. When she heard that her priests lay dead in the valley, she did not weep, and she did not rage where anyone could see her. Something cold and final settled into her instead, and she called for the man who had defeated them by name. Then she sent word to him, "By this time tomorrow, you will be dead, just as they are." The prophet fled into the wilderness that same night and did not stop for many days. He walked until his strength gave out, and he lay down under a tree and wished to die, certain that he was now the last man left who served the Lord. He fell asleep there, exhausted, and when he woke, food had been left beside him, though he had not seen anyone come or go. He ate and slept again, and woke to find more food waiting a second time. Strengthened, he walked on for 40 days until he reached a mountain, and there he climbed into a cave and stayed the night. A voice came to him in the cave. "What are you doing here?" "I have been very jealous for the Lord," he said, "but the people of Israel have killed your prophets, and now I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me too." He was told to stand outside the cave and wait. A great wind tore past the mountain, strong enough to split rock, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind came a shaking of the ground, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire either. Then, after the fire, came a quiet, low voice, and the prophet covered his face and stepped out to listen. He was told that he was not the only one left after all. There were others in Israel, thousands of them, who had never bowed to Baal. He was given new tasks to carry out, and a man was named who would one day finish what had begun on that mountain. Strengthened, the prophet left the cave and returned to the work he had been given. One of the most striking parts of Jezebel's life was when she helped the king take a vineyard that did not belong to him. Near the palace at Jezreel, a man owned a small vineyard that had belonged to his family for generations. A vineyard he had tended since he was a boy, walking those same rows with his father before him. The king wanted the land to make himself a garden, and he offered to buy it. But the man refused, because the land was not merely land to him. It was the only inheritance he had to leave behind. the one thing that would still belong to his family long after he was gone. So the king went home and lay down on his bed, facing the wall, and would not eat. Jezebel found him there, untouched food still on the table beside him.
Get up, eat something, I will get it for you.
The vineyard.
I will get it for you.
Jezebel.
She arranged for the man to be falsely accused before the people of his own city. 2 men stood up and swore he had cursed God and the king, though it was not true, and no one in the crowd spoke up to defend him. Within days, he was dragged outside the walls and stoned to death on ground that had once belonged to his father and his father's father.
Before we continue, these videos take hours and hours to make, so if you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
Get up and take the vineyard. It once belonged to his father and his father's father.
The king rose and walked down to the vineyard and stood at last on the land he had wanted, as if it had cost him nothing at all. But the same prophet from Mount Carmel was waiting for him there. "You have done evil in the eyes of the Lord," the prophet said. "In the very place where this man's blood was spilled, dogs will lick up your own blood, and dogs will devour Jezebel." Years passed, and the words seemed to fade, the way old warnings do when nothing happens right away. Then, in a battle against a neighboring kingdom, the king was struck by an arrow as he stood in his chariot, and he bled out where he stood. When his men brought the chariot back, dogs licked his blood from the floor of it, just as the prophet had said. His sons ruled after him, one after the other, and through it all, Jezebel remained in the palace at Jezreel as queen mother, keeping the same gods, her devotion to Baal as unshaken as it had been the day she first crossed into Israel. But far away in a military camp in secret, a young prophet pulled a commander named Jehu into an inner room and poured oil over his head, anointing him king over Israel and telling him to put an end to Jezebel's house once and for all. The young prophet fled the camp the moment the oil had dried on Jehu's brow, before anyone could stop him. Jehu mounted his chariot that same day and rode hard for Jezreel. A watchman standing on the tower at Jezreel saw him coming and called down a warning, and the king, still recovering from wounds taken in battle, had his own chariot brought out and rode to meet him. "Do you come in peace?" the king asked. "How can there be peace?" Jehu called back. The king turned his chariot to flee, but Jehu drew his bow and struck him down before he had gone more than a few lengths, and the king fell in the very field that had once belonged to the man who was stoned for his vineyard. Jehu did not stop. He drove on toward the city. Jezebel heard that he was coming, and that the king was already dead. She did not run, and she did not hide. In the years since she had first arrived as a young princess from Sidon, she had buried a husband, watched her sons take the throne one after another, and never once bent her knee to the God of this land. She was not going to start now in the last hour she had left. She went to her room, and she painted her eyes carefully, the way she had every morning since she was a girl in Sidon, and she arranged her hair. And then she walked to a window above the city gate and looked down at the road, waiting. Jehu's chariot rolled up beneath the wall. "Have you come in peace, you murderer?" she called down to him. Jehu looked up at the window where she stood. "Who is on my side?" he shouted to the men gathered near the wall below her. A few of her own servants, standing just behind her in the room, looked down at him instead of at her. "Throw her down!" Jehu said. They seized Jezebel from behind and threw her from the window. She fell the length of the wall to the ground below, and the horses... Later, after Jehu had gone into the city and eaten and rested, he gave an order that she be buried, for she was, after all, a king's daughter. But when the men went out to the place where she had fallen, they found nothing left of her but her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. The dogs had already come, just as it had been spoken on that hillside among the vines so many years before, and there was nothing more of Jezebel left for anyone to find. One wrong move, and he would fall and get destroyed by everyone. Jonathan was a simple prince of Israel. He was also the son of King Saul. He became friends with the boy who defeated the giant Goliath, David. At the time, Jonathan was promised to be the king of Israel. But because of Saul's jealousy toward David, Jonathan was forced to choose between his father and his closest friend, and that choice would eventually cost him everything, including his life. Jonathan was the son of Saul, the first king of Israel. He was a brave young man, skilled with a bow, fast on his feet, and a fierce fighter in battle. He loved his father deeply, but his heart was always set on doing what was right, even when it cost him everything. In those days, the Philistines were a powerful and merciless enemy, pressing down on Israel from every side. They were warriors who had fought in countless wars, hardened men with armor of bronze and spears tipped with iron. They had set up a garrison at Geba, a stronghold watching over the land, taunting the people of Israel who lived in its shadow. Most of Israel had no swords or spears at all, because the Philistines had taken away every blacksmith from the land, leaving the people with nothing but plows and sickles to defend their homes. A nation without weapons stood against a nation built entirely for war. Jonathan gathered 1,000 men and struck down the Philistine garrison at Geba, tearing apart what the enemy thought was untouchable. When the Philistines heard what he had done, their fury shook the land. They gathered their armies together at Michmash, and the sight of them was enough to make grown men collapse to their knees. Their numbers were like the sand along the seashore, stretching across the hills as far as the eye could see, with chariots of iron and horsemen riding ahead of foot soldiers whose spears caught the sunlight like a field of fire. The men of Israel saw them coming and were seized with terror. Many ran and hid themselves in caves, in cracks among the rocks, in pits and thickets, anywhere the darkness could swallow them. Saul stayed behind with the few men who had not yet fled, but their hearts pounded with dread, because they had no army that could stand against what was coming down from the hills. But what they did not know was that very soon, one quiet act of courage, carried out by only 2 men, would shatter the enemy's spirit completely and turn their terror into chaos. Before going into battle, it was the custom in Israel to offer a burnt sacrifice to the Lord, asking for his blessing and protection before the fighting began. An animal would be killed and burned whole upon an altar, and only a prophet or priest was permitted to carry out this offering, never the king himself. Saul waited at Gilgal for the prophet Samuel to arrive and perform this sacrifice, so the army could march into battle with the Lord's favor resting upon them. But Samuel didn't come at the time he had promised. Day after day passed beneath a heavy, anxious sky, and Saul's men, watching the Philistines grow thicker across the hills like a storm cloud rolling closer, began to lose heart entirely, one by one. Then in greater numbers, they slipped away from the camp under cover of darkness, until almost no one remained standing beside their king. On the 7th day, with Samuel still nowhere in sight, and his army reduced to a mere handful of trembling men, Saul could wait no longer. He took the animal that had been set aside for the offering and performed the sacrifice with his own hands, even though this was strictly forbidden for a king to do. The moment the flames rose from the altar, Samuel arrived. He asked Saul why he had done such a thing, and Saul answered that he feared his last soldiers would scatter and the Philistines would crush them before the Lord's favor had even been sought. Samuel's words fell heavy upon him. He told Saul that because of this disobedience, his kingdom would not endure, and that the Lord had already chosen another man to take his place as king over Israel. Saul did not yet know the name of that man, but the words could not be called back, and from that day on, an invisible crack ran through his throne. The Philistines spread out across the countryside like locusts, sending raiding parties in 3 directions to plunder, burn, and terrify, while Israel had almost nothing left in their hands to fight back with. Only Saul and Jonathan carried true weapons of war. One of the most interesting parts of Jonathan's life was the day he decided to act completely alone, without permission, without an army, without even telling his own father. He turned to his armor-bearer and said, "Come, let us cross over to the garrison of the Philistines on the other side." The young man did not hesitate. The 2 of them walked out toward a narrow, brutal pass cut between 2 jagged cliffs. Jonathan told his armor-bearer that if the Philistines looked down and shouted for them to wait where they stood, they would stay below. But if the Philistines called out, "Come up to us," they would climb, because that would be the sign that the Lord himself had handed the enemy over into their hands. They stepped out into the open, where the Philistine watchmen could see them clearly. The enemy soldiers looked down at the 2 lone figures and burst into mocking laughter, shouting, "Look! The Hebrews are crawling out of their holes!" Then, full of arrogance, certain the 2 men posed no threat at all, they called down, "Come up to us, and we will teach you a lesson you won't forget." The moment Jonathan heard those words, he began climbing, digging his hands and feet into the cracks of the rock face, his armor-bearer scrambling right behind him. When he reached the top, breathless and covered in dust, he struck down the first soldiers standing there before they even understood what was happening. Then something extraordinary swept through the entire Philistine camp.
Before we continue, these videos takes many hours. If you could please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
A trembling, unnatural panic, sent by the hand of God himself, tore through their ranks like wildfire. Men who had stood like an unstoppable wall of iron, before everyone suddenly turned on each other in blind confusion, swords clashing against their own brothers in the smoke and noise, as told in 1 Samuel 14. Saul, sitting beneath a pomegranate tree in Gibeah, looked out and saw the enemy camp dissolving into chaos in the distance. He counted the soldiers around him and realized his son Jonathan was missing. He did not yet understand what had happened on that ridge, but he knew deep in his chest that something massive had just been set into motion. The Israelites, who had been hiding for days in the hills and forests of Mount Ephraim, heard the cries of the fleeing Philistines, and they poured out of their hiding places to join the chase. Even the Hebrews, who had been forced to serve inside the Philistine camp, turned their weapons on their former masters. And the Lord saved Israel that day in a way no one could have predicted that morning. But in the middle of the chase, Saul made a reckless vow before all his men, swearing a curse on anyone who stopped to eat until the enemy was completely wiped out. The soldiers, already weak with hunger from days of fear and fasting, pressed on through a forest where wild honey dripped thick from the branches onto the ground. Jonathan, who had not heard his father's vow, dipped the end of his staff into the honeycomb and ate, feeling strength return to his tired body almost instantly. When a soldier told him of the oath Saul had sworn, Jonathan said plainly that the army would have fought far better that day with food in their stomachs instead of empty, aching bellies. By evening, the men were so overcome with hunger that they slaughtered animals right there on the open ground and devoured the meat with the blood still in it, breaking the law of the Lord without even realizing the weight of what they had done. Saul built an altar to set things right, then asked the priest to inquire of the Lord whether he should press the attack through the night and finish off the scattered enemy completely. But no answer came from heaven, only silence. Saul declared before his men that someone among them had sinned, and that whoever it was would die for it, even if it turned out to be his own son. He cast lots before the entire army, and the lot fell directly on Jonathan. Saul turned to his son, his face pale, and demanded to know what he had done. Jonathan answered without flinching, telling him plainly about the honey at the end of his staff, and said he was ready to die for it, if that was what justice required. But the soldiers would not allow it. They rose up together and declared that Jonathan had worked alongside God himself to win such an impossible victory that day, and that not a single hair on his head should be touched. So the people stood between Jonathan and his own father's blade, and Jonathan was spared from death. Sometime later, a shepherd boy named David arrived at the camp, carrying nothing more than a sling and 5 smooth stones gathered from a riverbed. The Philistines had returned again, and this time they brought with them a champion named Goliath, a giant of a man covered head to toe in bronze armor, his spear alone weighing more than most men could lift, a figure so massive and terrifying that he had mocked the armies of Israel for 40 straight days without a single soldier daring to face him. David stepped out into the open field and struck him down with one stone hurled straight into his forehead, and the giant who had terrified an entire nation fell dead in the dirt. The Philistines, watching their champion crumble, turned and fled in terror, and Israel chased them down without mercy. When David was brought before Saul afterward, Jonathan stood watching, and something happened between the two of them that would shape the rest of both their lives. Jonathan's heart became bound to David's, as if they had been brothers since birth, and he loved him as much as he loved his own life. He took off his own royal robe and placed it on David, then gave him his sword, his bow, and his belt. And the two of them made a solemn covenant of loyalty before the Lord that neither one would ever break. But Saul's heart began to twist with a darkness that grew heavier by the day. He watched the women of Israel sing songs praising David's name above his own, and a consuming jealousy took root deep inside him. He began plotting against David in secret, sending him into the most dangerous battles he could find, hoping he would never return, and even hurling his spear at him with his own hands inside the walls of his own house. David fled the palace under cover of night, and Saul's rage only grew darker and more dangerous with each passing day. One of the hardest moments of Jonathan's life came when he was forced to choose between the father who raised him and the friend he loved as his own soul. Saul called David back, swearing on his life that he meant him no harm, but David refused to trust the words of a man who had already tried to kill him twice. He went to Jonathan in a quiet field and begged him to find out the truth hidden behind his father's promises. Jonathan agreed, and together they devised a plan. David would hide himself in the field for 3 days, while Jonathan tested his father's heart at the dinner table, sending word back through a secret signal made with arrows. At the feast, Saul noticed David's seat sitting empty. Jonathan offered an excuse for his absence, and Saul's face twisted into a rage so violent it shook the entire room. He turned on his own son, calling him a disgrace to his own house, accusing him of betraying his father's throne for the sake of a shepherd boy. He told Jonathan that as long as David drew breath, neither of them would ever sit safely upon the throne of Israel. Jonathan asked what crime David had even committed to deserve such hatred, and in a blind fury, Saul seized his spear and hurled it at his own son, the same way he once had hurled it at David. Jonathan rose from the table without a word and walked out into the night, burning with grief for the friend he was about to lose. The next morning, Jonathan walked out to the field carrying his bow, with a young boy beside him to retrieve the arrows. He drew back the bow and shot an arrow far beyond where the boy stood, then called out the secret words, "The arrow is beyond you," the hidden signal that told David his life was in danger and he must flee immediately. He sent the boy back into the city carrying the weapons, and once they were finally alone, Jonathan went to David, hiding among the rocks. The two men wept together in the open field, knowing exactly what this parting meant for both of their lives. Jonathan reminded David of the oath sworn between them long ago, that their families would remain bound together no matter what storm came between them. And then David rose to his feet and disappeared into the wilderness. David spent the long months that followed running from place to place, hiding in remote caves and rugged desert strongholds, while Saul hunted him relentlessly across the land with an army at his back. In the wilderness of Ziph, surrounded by jagged rock and scorching heat, Jonathan found him one final time. He strengthened David's hand in God, telling him once more that he would one day sit upon the throne of Israel, and that he, Jonathan, would stand faithfully beside him when that day finally came. The two of them renewed their covenant before the Lord. And then Jonathan returned home to his father's house, while David remained behind in hiding, as written in 1 Samuel 23. The years rolled forward, and the long war between Israel and the Philistines never truly ended. The Philistines gathered once more, an enormous and terrifying force, camping near Mount Gilboa and spreading their armies across the valley of Jezreel like a dark flood. Saul gathered what remained of Israel's army and camped on the slopes above them. The night before the battle, fear gripped Saul so completely that he sought out a medium for guidance, since the prophet Samuel had long since died, and the Lord had stopped answering him through dreams or priests. The spirit of Samuel rose before him and spoke without mercy, telling him plainly that Israel would fall the very next day, and that Saul and his sons would die alongside their men. At dawn, the Philistines surged forward against Israel's weakened lines, and the men of Israel began to break and scatter beneath the weight of the assault. Jonathan fought fiercely alongside his father and his brothers on the slopes of Gilboa. But the Philistine archers pressed in close, raining down arrows without pause. And Jonathan was struck down on that mountain, falling alongside his brothers Abinadab and Malchishua. Saul himself was wounded badly by the arrows, and rather than be captured alive and dragged in chains before his enemies, he fell upon his own sword. Seeing the king dead on the ground, his armor-bearer did the very same. The Philistines returned the next day to strip the bodies of the fallen, and there, among the dead on Mount Gilboa, they found Saul and his 3 sons lying together. They cut off Saul's head and hung the bodies of the king and his sons upon the wall of Beth-shan for all to see. When the men of Jabesh Gilead heard what had been done, they marched through the night without rest, took the bodies down from the wall, carried them home, and buried their bones beneath a tree, mourning for 7 long days. Far away, David received word of the battle from a messenger who had fled the slaughter at Gilboa. When he heard that Saul and Jonathan had both fallen on that mountain, he tore his clothes and wept bitterly, and every man standing with him did the same. David composed a lament for the 2 of them, and commanded that it be taught throughout all of Israel. And in it he spoke of his friend, calling him dearly loved, swifter than eagles, stronger than lions, grieving that he had fallen in the very midst of the battle. One wrong move, and the king would die. A simple man got the task to protect the king from Absalom. No sword, no army, just his words. To save David, he pretended to be one of Absalom's men. At last, he convincingly fooled him and led Absalom into his own trap. Men were coming to kill the king. That was the plan from the very start. To take David's head, tear the kingdom out of his hands, and leave nothing of his rule behind. And the only thing standing between that plan and the king's death was one quiet servant with no sword and no army at all. His name was Hushai. He was known as the king's friend. It was a title other men spent their whole lives trying to earn. He had no riches and no soldiers under his command. What he had was something harder to take away: the trust of a king. Hushai did not know yet that the ground under the whole kingdom was already cracking, and that soon his job would be to stop a murder before it happened. For weeks, a young man had been standing at the gates of the city every morning. He greeted every person who walked by. He listened to their problems. He told them that if he were judge, things would be fairer. The people began to love him. And far away, in the hills of Hebron, he was quietly gathering men who would call him king in his father's place. His name was Absalom. He was David's own son. The news hit the palace like fire spreading through dry grass. A runner ran in, gasping. Absalom had declared himself king. All of Israel was turning to follow him. And everyone in that palace understood exactly what this meant. Absalom was not coming to share the throne. He was coming to take David's head and rule alone. Absalom was not doing this by himself. Behind him stood a man with one of the sharpest minds in the kingdom. A man David himself used to trust completely. His name was Ahithophel. Without him, the rebellion would have fallen apart in days. With him, the plan to kill David had real strategy behind it, and it was already moving fast. David did not stay to find out how bad things had become. He gathered his family and his servants, and within hours, the king of Israel was walking out of his own city on foot, knowing that somewhere behind him, men were already planning his death. His guards marched with him, their faces grim, their hands never far from their weapons. Hushai walked with him. His clothes were torn. Dust covered his head, a sign of deep sadness. He followed his king up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he climbed, ready to go wherever David went, even into the wild country with nothing. At the top of the mountain, David stopped. Hushai stood in front of him. David looked at him for a long moment. "If you come with me, you will only slow me down."
Hushai, my friend, I need you. I am here, my king. Go to Absalom, be my eyes. I will not fail you.
"If you do that, you can work against Ahithophel's plans for me." Hushai understood right away what David was really asking. He was not being sent away to safety. He was being sent back to stop the very men trying to kill the king. And he would have to do it standing right beside them, smiling, while they planned David's death in front of him. David told him, "Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, are still there. Tell them anything you hear in the palace. Their sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, will bring the message to me." Hushai turned around and walked back down the mountain. He was walking away from his king and straight back into the city he had just escaped, back toward the very men who wanted David's head on a spear. While Hushai walked back into the city, David kept moving the other way, deeper into the wild country. On that road, a man ran out from a small village, shouting curses and throwing stones at David, screaming that he was a murderer who deserved to lose everything. At that very same time, On the road into Jerusalem, Hushai walked calmly through the gates, wearing the face of a loyal friend, straight toward the men trying to put David in the ground. Absalom had just entered the city himself. For one moment, Hushai and Ahithophel stood close enough to look at each other. Neither man said a word, but Ahithophel's eyes stayed on Hushai a moment too long, almost as if something told him this man was not as loyal as he claimed to be. Hushai called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom turned and looked at him. He did not smile. His eyes moved slowly over Hushai's torn clothes, his dusty head. Guards stood close by, ready to strike at the wrong answer. "Is this your loyalty to your friend?" Absalom asked. "Why didn't you go with David?" No one moved. For a moment, everything hung on what Hushai would say next. If Absalom did not believe him, there would be no second chance. Hushai did not look away. "No," he said. "Whoever the Lord and the people of Israel have chosen, I will follow. I served your father. Now I will serve you." Absalom studied him a little longer. Then he believed him. Hushai was welcome to Absalom's inner circle, given a seat among the men deciding the future of the kingdom, while his true loyalty stayed with the king they were trying to destroy. Every day after that, he sat in rooms where other men spoke openly about ending David's life, and every day he had to nod along as if he wanted the same thing they did. Soon, the most dangerous night of Hushai's life began. This was the night the rebellion would decide exactly how David was going to die. Ahithophel stood before Absalom with a plan already in his mind. "Give me 12,000 men," he said. "I will go out tonight after David. I will catch him while he is tired and afraid, and everyone with him will run. I will kill the king myself, alone, and bring everyone else back to you." It was a plan built entirely around one single goal: David's death that very night, before he had any chance to prepare a defense. The plan pleased Absalom right away. It pleased every man in the room. It was fast and simple. David, tired and unguarded out in the open country, would have no time to escape it. Then Absalom paused. "Call Hushai too," he said. "Let us hear what he thinks." Hushai walked in, already knowing exactly what this meant. If Ahithophel's plan went forward tonight, David would be dead by morning, and the entire reason David had sent him back into this city would die with him. Absalom asked him plainly, "Should we do as he says? If not, speak." Hushai chose his next words carefully, because the king's life now depended entirely on what he said in the next few seconds. One wrong word, one plan that sounded weaker than Ahithophel's, and Absalom would send his men out that very night with nothing standing in their way. "This time," he said, "Ahithophel's advice is not good." The room went silent. Every eye turned to him. "You know your father and his men," Hushai said, facing Absalom. "They are strong fighters, and right now their hearts are bitter, like a bear that has lost her cubs. Your father is a man of war. He will not be sleeping out in the open, where 12,000 men could easily find him. He has likely already hidden himself somewhere no one would think to look." He let his words sink in before going on. "If your men attack first, and even a few of them fall, word will spread that your army has been beaten. Then even your bravest soldiers will lose their courage. Everyone in Israel knows your father is a fighter, and that his men are brave." Then Hushai offered something else. Not Ahithophel's quick strike in the dark, but something much bigger. Something that would still end with David's death, but in a way far slower, far louder, and far more tempting to a young man who wanted to be remembered as a conqueror. Gather all of Israel to you, from one end of the land to the other, as many as the sand on the shore. Lead the army yourself. Then we will find David wherever he is and fall on him like dew falling on the ground. Not one man with him will survive, and if he runs into a city, we will bring ropes and pull it down stone by stone. It was a plan that put Absalom at the center of his own story, leading a massive army himself, instead of waiting at home while someone else brought him his father's head. Absalom and everyone in the room agreed at once. Hushai's advice is better than Ahithophel's, Absalom said. None of them understood what had really just happened. It was not only Hushai's clever words that won the room. It was the Lord working through those words to undo Ahithophel's plan completely, so that the disaster meant for David would fall on Absalom instead. The one night that could have ended with David's head taken in the dark had just slipped away, and no one in that room realized it. Only one man understood exactly what had happened. Ahithophel said nothing. He watched the room praise another man's plan over his own. He stood up, walked out, went home, saddled his donkey, and rode to his own town. There he put his affairs in order. Then he took his own life. Hushai had no time to think about what had happened to him. He was still standing inside a city that would kill him the moment they learned the truth. And the mission was not finished. David was still in danger, and the clock had already started counting down again. He went quickly to find Zadok and Abiathar the priests and told them everything. What Ahithophel had planned and what he had said instead. Send word to David right now, he told them. Tell him not to stay the night at the river crossing. He must cross the Jordan, or he and everyone with him will be caught and killed. The priest's sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, were waiting just outside the city, careful not to be seen coming or going. A servant girl carried the message to them in secret, slipping out through the back streets where no guard would think to stop her. But a boy spotted them and ran to tell Absalom. The two men did not wait to see what would happen. They ran to a house in a nearby village and climbed down into a well in the yard before anyone could catch sight of them. The woman of the house worked quickly, covering the opening and scattering grain over the top, so nothing looked out of place at all. When Absalom's men came running up the road looking for them, she answered without hesitation, her voice calm. They were here, she said, but they crossed the stream already. The men searched the house. They searched the yard. They found nothing. Once the searchers were gone, Ahimaaz and Jonathan climbed out and ran through the night to find David. Get up, they told him. Cross the Jordan now. And they told him everything Ahithophel had planned against his life. David did not wait. That same night, he and everyone with him crossed the Jordan River. By sunrise, not one of them remained on the other side, and the plan to catch him in the open country had failed completely. Absalom gathered his army exactly the way Hushai had told him to, as many men as the sand on the shore, and crossed the Jordan after his father, still believing this army would bring him David's death, and the whole kingdom in one stroke. The two armies met in the forest of Ephraim, and there the war that had begun with one single goal, the death of the king, was finally decided. Absalom's men fell before David's soldiers. Absalom himself died there, caught in the branches of a tree as he tried to escape, and the mission that had started with his father's head never reached its end. Far from the battlefield, Hushai heard the news the same quiet way he had done everything else in this story, without a throne, without a sword, without most people ever knowing what he had truly done.
These videos take hours and hours to make. If you could please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
One mistake, and the evil queen would kill him. A simple man hid 100 prophets from the killer queen. She wasn't just evil. She was merciless. A true hunter, and she wouldn't stop until every prophet was dead. Yet, every single night, one man kept them alive. Long ago, in the kingdom of Israel, there lived a man named Obadiah. He served as steward over the household of King Ahab, trusted with managing the king's entire estate. Yet, unlike the king he served, Obadiah feared the Lord with his whole heart. King Ahab ruled over Israel, but his wife held great power over him. Her name was Jezebel, a princess from Sidon who worshipped a false god named Baal. Through her, Ahab abandoned the Lord, and altars to Baal rose up across the land. Jezebel could not tolerate the prophets of the Lord. She viewed them as enemies of her gods, and she gave the order that every one of them be hunted down. Soldiers spread out across Israel, kicking open doors, searching barns and hillsides, dragging prophets out by their robes. Many were struck down where they stood, their bodies left as a warning to anyone who still called on the name of the Lord. Word of the killings spread from village to village, and a heavy fear settled over the land. But inside the very palace where Jezebel gave her orders, Obadiah worked secretly against her. Late at night, while the palace slept, he would slip out through a side gate, wrapped in a dark cloak, carrying baskets of bread under his arm. He moved quietly through the hills, glancing over his shoulder at every shadow, terrified that one of Jezebel's soldiers might be watching. He had gathered 100 prophets of the Lord and hidden them away in 2 caves carved into the rock. 50 men crammed into each, surviving in darkness. Every single day, Obadiah made this same dangerous journey, bringing them bread and water with his own hands, knowing that if he were ever discovered, his own head would be the next one rolling at Jezebel's feet. During this same time, the Lord sent a prophet named Elijah to stand before Ahab. Elijah told the king plainly that because of his sins, no rain or dew would fall on Israel except by his word. From that day, the sky over the kingdom turned dry, and it stayed that way. The drought stretched on season after season. Streams that had run for generations shrank into thin trickles, then disappeared completely, leaving cracked beds of dust where children once played. Farmers stood in their fields, staring at crops that had withered before they could even ripen. By the 3rd year, the famine had grown so severe that even Ahab's own horses and mules were dying for lack of food and water in their stalls. For those same 3 years, Ahab had been hunting Elijah relentlessly, blaming him for the disaster that had fallen on his kingdom. He sent riders galloping to every neighboring nation, pounding on the doors of foreign kings, demanding that Elijah be handed over the moment he was found. But the Lord kept his prophet hidden through it all. After 3 years, the word of the Lord came to Elijah again. The Lord told him to go and present himself to Ahab, for rain was finally about to return to the land. Around this same time, Ahab summoned Obadiah and gave him an urgent task. With the famine worsening by the day, Ahab needed every patch of grass left in his kingdom found before his animals dropped dead completely. He told Obadiah they would split up, each man searching a different stretch of land. Ahab rode out in one direction, and Obadiah set out walking in the other, moving slowly down a dry, dusty road, past abandoned wells and empty fields, his eyes scanning every hillside for even a single blade of green. As Obadiah walked, a figure suddenly stepped onto the road ahead of him, almost as if he had appeared from nowhere. Obadiah froze for a moment, squinting against the sun, and then his breath caught in his throat.
Before we continue, these videos take hours and hours to make. If you could please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching from.
It was Elijah, the very prophet that Ahab and every king nearby had been hunting for 3 relentless years. Obadiah dropped to his knees and bowed his face to the ground before him, asking, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" Elijah answered him plainly, "Yes. Go and tell your master, Elijah is here." 1 Kings 18:7-8. Fear gripped Obadiah's chest at these words. He pictured himself standing before Ahab, delivering this news, only to have Elijah vanish into thin air the moment the king arrived, leaving him to pay for it with his life. He said to Elijah, "What have I done wrong, that you would hand your servant over to Ahab to be killed? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom my master has not searched for you. Every time his men returned and said you could not be found, he made them swear an oath that it was true. And now you tell me to go and say you are here. I don't know where you might disappear to next. And if I go and Ahab cannot find you, he will kill me." 1 Kings 18:9-12. He reminded Elijah of what he had risked in secret, saying, "Was it not told to you what I did while Jezebel was killing the Lord's prophets? I hid 100 of them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and fed them bread and water with my own hands the whole time." Elijah looked at him steadily and said, "As the Lord Almighty lives, the one I serve, I will present myself to Ahab today." Obadiah rose to his feet and hurried back along the road, his heart pounding, until he found Ahab and told him that Elijah had returned. Ahab wasted no time. He mounted his chariot and rode out at once to meet the prophet he had hunted for 3 long years. When Ahab finally stood face to face with Elijah, he glared at him and said, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" Elijah did not flinch. He answered that it was not he who had brought trouble on Israel, but Ahab himself, by abandoning the commands of the Lord and chasing after Baal instead. Elijah then gave Ahab an instruction. He told the king to gather all of Israel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal, on Mount Carmel. Riders went out across the kingdom carrying the summons, and soon crowds of people climbed the mountain alongside the prophets of Baal, curious whispers passing through the gathering as they wondered what was about to happen. Standing before the crowd, Elijah told them plainly that they could not keep wavering between 2 gods. If the Lord was God, they should follow him. If Baal was God, they should follow him instead. The people said nothing, shifting uneasily where they stood. Elijah then proposed a test. 2 bulls would be prepared, one by the prophets of Baal and one by himself, each laid on wood upon an altar. Neither side would light the fire themselves. Instead, they would call out to their God, and whichever God answered by sending fire down from heaven would be shown as the true God before everyone watching. The prophets of Baal went first. They built their altar with trembling hands, careful to do everything exactly right, and laid the wood and the bull upon it. Then they began calling out to Baal, their voices rising together across the mountain from the early morning. Hour after hour passed, and nothing happened. By midday, some of them began dancing wildly around the altar, throwing their arms toward the sky. Elijah watched from a distance and began mocking them, telling them to shout even louder in case their God was sleeping or perhaps away on a journey. Stung by his words, the prophets grew frantic. They grabbed swords and spears and began slashing at their own arms and chests, blood running down their skin. Still, nothing answered. No fire fell. No voice spoke back to them. The mountain stayed silent, except for their own desperate cries. As evening drew near, Elijah called the people closer to him. He took 12 stones, one for each tribe, descended from the sons of Jacob, and rebuilt the altar of the Lord that had long lain broken and forgotten. He dug a trench around its base, arranged the wood carefully on top, and laid the pieces of the bull over it. Then he told the people, to fill 4 large jars with water and pour them over the offering and the wood, soaking it completely. And he told them to do it again a second time, and then a third. Water ran down over every piece of wood and stone, and the trench he had dug around the altar filled completely, leaving no possible way that any spark could survive on its own. At the exact time of the evening sacrifice, Elijah stepped forward in front of the entire watching crowd. He lifted his eyes toward the sky and prayed aloud, asking the Lord to answer him in that very moment, so that every person standing on that mountain would know once and for all that the Lord was God in Israel. The instant he finished speaking, fire dropped from the sky. It struck the altar with a force that made the crowd gasp and stumble backward, consuming the soaked sacrifice, the drenched wood, the stones themselves, and even licking up every last drop of water that had filled the trench around it. When the people saw this, they fell to the ground on their faces all at once, crying out together with one voice, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Elijah immediately gave the order to seize the prophets of Baal. The crowd surged forward and grabbed them, dragging them down the mountainside to the Kishon Valley below, where every one of them was put to death that same evening. Afterward, Elijah told Ahab to go up and eat, for he could already hear the sound of a coming rainstorm. While Ahab climbed up to eat and drink, Elijah went to the very top of Mount Carmel, bent down low to the ground, and sent his servant to look out toward the sea. The servant returned and said there was nothing to see. Elijah sent him back again. 6 times the servant went and came back with nothing. On the 7th time, he came running back, breathless, saying that a small cloud, no bigger than a man's hand, was rising up out of the sea. Elijah sent word at once to Ahab, telling him to hitch up his chariot and ride down quickly before the rain trapped him on the mountain. Within moments, the sky turned black with thick clouds rolling in from the sea. The wind began to howl across the mountainside, and a heavy rain came pouring down over the land. Ahab's chariot raced down toward Jezreel as the storm broke loose behind him, soaking the parched ground that had waited 3 long years to feel water again. And so the land of Israel, after 3 years without a single drop of rain, finally watched its rivers begin to fill. Its soil softened beneath the downpour, and life slowly returned to a kingdom that had nearly starved.
These videos take hours and hours to make. If you could please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching from.
One wrong choice, and the woman he loved disappeared into the night. A simple farmer received an unfaithful woman from God to be his wife. He obeyed. Years passed. A family was built. And against all reason, he fell deeply in love with her until one night she decided she wanted more. The word of the Lord came to Hosea. He told Hosea to take a wife who would be unfaithful to him. This would show how far the people of the land had wandered from God. Hosea obeyed. He took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, to be his wife. In the beginning, the house of Hosea was a happy one. Every morning before the sun was up, Hosea and Gomer walked out to the fields together. They worked side by side all day, breaking the ground, planting the seed, pulling weeds from between the rows. At midday, they sat together under the same tree and ate bread and a bit of cheese. Gomer had a son. The Lord told Hosea to name him Jezreel because of the killing that happened there. Hosea would carry the boy on his shoulders out to the fields in the cool morning air and set him down in the shade while he worked. The boy would fall asleep to the sound of his father's hands moving through the soil. Gomer had another child, a daughter. The Lord told Hosea to name her Lo-Ruhamah, which means not loved, because God said he would stop showing mercy to Israel. Later, Gomer had a 3rd child, a son. The Lord told Hosea to name him Lo-Ami, which means not mine, because Israel had turned so far from God that they were no longer acting like his people. But Hosea did not know yet that these names were not just names. They were a warning. Sitting quietly inside his own house, waiting for the day the whole nation would understand what they meant. What was happening in his own home was about to happen to the whole nation, and no one watching his children grow up in that house could have guessed it yet. There were evenings when the work ran late, and Hosea and Gomer walked home together as the sun went down behind the hills. One evening, they stopped at the edge of the field to rest. Gomer looked up at the sky, watching the colors spread out over the grain. Hosea was not looking at the sky, he was looking at her face, watching the light from the sunset catch in her eyes. He didn't say anything, he just watched her. And then they picked up their tools and walked the rest of the way home in the dark. There was a season when the rains came late, and the whole household worked harder than usual to carry water from the well to the rows that were drying out. Gomer carried jars on her shoulders back and forth all day, and her arms ached, but the crop held. They celebrated quietly that year when the harvest came in heavier than they expected, and Hosea brought home a bit of honey from a trader passing through. After some time, Gomer began to change. She looked at her life with Hosea and thought it was too small. She started going to the market more often than she needed to, staying longer than the errands required. She saw other women there wearing nice clothes and jewelry, carrying wine and oil they hadn't earned, and she wanted that kind of life for herself. She came home later and later, and she stopped walking out to the fields with Hosea in the mornings, telling him she was tired. One morning she did not come home at all. She had left in the night while the house was quiet and gone looking for other men who she thought would give her bread, water, and wine. She walked away from Hosea's house and did not look back at it once. One of the hardest parts of Hosea's life began the morning after she left. He woke up and reached for her, and she wasn't there. He didn't run after her that day. He went out to the fields alone and worked the same ground they used to work together, and at midday, he sat under the same tree by himself, with no one to share the bread with. Some evenings, he would stop at the same spot where they used to watch the sunset, and he would just stand there, alone. He waited at home with the children, feeding them, putting them to bed. While he waited, the Lord told him what was happening to Gomer. Even far away, she was chasing after the men she'd run to, but she would not catch them. She would look for them, but she would not find them. Gomer moved from town to town. In the first town she came to, a man took her in for a while and gave her a string of beads, and she wore them through the streets, thinking they made her someone new. She stayed in his house through one season, and she put on her jewelry every morning, believing she had found the life she was looking for. She didn't realize that everything she had, the food, the wine, the oil, had really come from God all along, and not from this man. She thought she was moving up in life. She wasn't. God made her path harder. The man who had taken her in grew tired of her and sent her away before the next season turned. She went to a second town, and there, a different man let her stay for a short while, but he too grew cold toward her. And one evening she came back from the market to find her things set outside his door. She knocked, and no one answered. The things she used to get easily started disappearing. The men who once let her into their homes started shutting their doors instead. She kept moving from place to place, and the harder she searched, the less she found in her hands at the end of each day. One of the hardest nights of Gomer's life was the night she had nowhere left to go. She sat outside the gate of a town in the cold. She thought back to her old life, the fields at sunrise, the evenings walking home with Hosea. She said to herself,
I will go back to my first husband. I was better off then than I am now.
She remembered that it was Hosea who had given her food, wine, and clothes, not the men she had run after, who had given her only a few short seasons before turning her out into the street. The Lord spoke to Hosea again. This time it wasn't a command to punish her. It was a command to go and find her. The Lord said, "I will lead her into the desert and speak kindly to her there." Hosea 2:14. Hosea left his fields untended for the first time since she had gone, and he went out to look for her. He walked from town to town, asking people at the gates if they had seen a woman matching her description. At one gate, the guards pointed him toward the next town down the road. In a market in another town, a man selling cloths remembered her and told him which direction she had gone. Finally, after many days of walking and asking, Hosea found her.
Before we continue, these videos take hours and hours to make, so if you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
She wasn't the same woman who had left his house with her jewelry catching the light and her eyes on other men. She had been taken in by someone else and was now treated almost like property, kept rather than loved. Hosea stood in the doorway and looked at her. She looked back at him. For a moment, neither of them said anything at all. Hosea didn't walk away. He paid for her freedom, 15 pieces of silver, a measure of barley, and half a measure of barley, and gave it to the man who had her. Then he reached out his hand. She took it. They walked back to his house together, along the same road, past the same fields, the same gates she had once passed through running the other way. She kept her eyes down toward the road the whole way home. When they got home, Hosea didn't go right back to how things used to be. He told her she would have to stay close to him for a while. No other men, and he wouldn't be with other women either. They needed to rebuild what had been broken before they could go back to living as they had before. Gomer agreed. She stayed inside the house, helping with small tasks, sitting near the children, going nowhere without Hosea knowing. Day after day passed, and each day put more distance between her and the life she'd left behind. At first, the house felt strange to both of them, full of long silences at mealtimes. The house that used to be filled with the sound of her walking out the door now had a different feeling. Two people slowly learning to live together again. Hosea took care of her like before, brought her water when she was thirsty, mended the roof before the rains came, and he didn't bring up the past, not once. Some of the most important days of Hosea's life were the quiet ones that came after this, the ones where nothing big happened at all. Gomer worked around the house in the mornings, grinding grain, mending clothes, watching the children. Hosea went out to the fields and came back at night, the same as he always had. One day, several weeks into her return, she walked out to the edge of the field to bring him water, and she found him already stopped there, watching the sunset, just like he used to before she left. She stood next to him without saying a word, and the two of them watched it together. The next evening, she came out again at the same time, and the evening after that. It became part of their routine again, just like the field work used to be. Their children had watched their mother leave before. Now, they watched her stay. They saw their parents standing together at the edge of the field every evening. And slowly, the fear that had filled the house since she left started to fade out of their faces. But neither Hosea nor Gomer realized yet that their story wasn't just about them anymore. What happened in their home was becoming a picture of something much bigger. A picture of how far the whole nation had wandered from God and what it would take to bring them back. Outside their home, the nation kept moving toward trouble. Assyria, a powerful enemy nation to the north, was growing stronger near Israel's borders every year. Israel's kings kept getting overthrown one after another, often by violence. The priests kept leading people to worship statues instead of God. Statues set up in the towns of Bethel and Gilgal, where crowds gathered to bow before them. The people kept breaking their promises to one another and trusting other nations to protect them instead of trusting God. Hosea spoke out against all of this. He stood at the city gates in the early mornings and spoke against the priests and the people doing wrong. He told them God wanted loyalty, not empty rituals carried out at the altars without any change of heart behind them. He told them that just like a husband had gone out into the towns to bring back his wife, God would deal with his people the same way, breaking them down so he could heal them again. Hosea would speak in the city gates all morning and then walk the long road home in the afternoon heat. Gomer would be waiting at the edge of the field when he came into sight, just like she'd started doing since coming back. He'd set down his walking stick at the door, wash the dust from his feet, and they'd eat together while the children told him what had happened that day.
We helped him carry his goods.
You did?
Afterward, Hosea and Gomer would walk back out to that same spot at the edge of the field to watch the sun go down, just like they used to when they were young and just starting out. Years passed this way. Hosea kept living in his house with Gomer by his side. Their children grew older, carrying the weight of the names given to them at birth, but also carrying the memory of a mother who had left and a father who had gone out into strange towns to bring her home. The family that had almost fallen apart was standing strong again, the fields still planted and harvested in their season. Hosea spoke about a day that was still coming, a day he wrote down himself. After this, the people of Israel will turn back. They will look for the Lord their God. Hosea 3:5. He kept telling people this even as Assyria's army kept getting closer every year, and even as Israel's kings kept sending messengers to Egypt asking for help that would never come. At home, the years settled into something calm and steady. Gomer stayed in the home Hosea had brought her back to. The children stayed under their father's roof. And, in time, some of them married and brought their own children to visit. The fields were planted and harvested season after season, the same as they had always been. Every evening, once the work was done, Hosea and Gomer walked out together to that same spot at the edge of the field, the same place they had stood as a young husband and wife